Have you ever inherited something so mysterious it shattered your reality? That's exactly what happens when Terrence Wynn steps into his great-uncle's Victorian mansion and discovers a living, breathing, alien presence within its walls. From jaw-dropping illusions to cosmic devices that bend space and time, the action in this story will keep you on the edge of your seat. But we're just getting started. If you want to witness the high-stakes battles, the shocking reveals, and the heart-stopping finale, make sure to experience the story from beginning to end. By doing so, you'll uncover how Terrence and the enigmatic caretaker stand against a powerful organization determined to exploit otherworldly forces. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support ensures we can continue bringing you more thrilling adventures, surprising twists, and fascinating tales that spark the imagination. Terrence Wynn stared at the shimmering notification projected by his desk's hollow emitter, its pale blue text swirling through official legal jargon. He recognized the sender, Eisen and Farnsworth, a law firm known for its impeccable AI-driven estate services. He sipped at his coffee, though the taste barely registered. News had a way of dulling the senses, and this particular revelation was no exception. His great-uncle Roderick Wynn, the family recluse, was dead. The message highlighted an array of inheritance formalities, transfers of property titles, asset claims, and so forth. But the one line that captured Terrence's full attention was a mention of a Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Orchard City. It felt absurd that Roderick, with whom Terrence had barely exchanged a handful of words since childhood, had left him anything at all. The morning light glinted off the sleek surfaces of Terrence's modest apartment. Everything was efficient and modern. Environmental regulators, a small self-cleaning kitchen unit, in a living area with a fold-down bed. He was a quantum probability analyst for Vectus Corporation, a job that mostly involved poring over endless streams of data to predict financial market shifts. There was something ironically old-fashioned about receiving a centuries-old mansion when you were used to analyzing intangible equations all day. As he tapped the desk interface to scroll through the message, a surge of half curiosity, half dread settled in his chest. The official text explained that the mansion had existed in the Wynn family's possession for 7 generations, always quietly maintained, never sold, and rarely even visited. The last memory Terrence had of Roderick flashed in his mind. He had been maybe 16, trailing behind his parents at a gathering. Roderick's eccentricities were on full display. He'd cornered Terrence in a hallway to lecture him about dimensional thresholds, spouting claims that reality was far more malleable than anyone suspected. Few in the family took Roderick seriously. They found him harmless, if not a little unhinged, and Terrence's parents had quietly suggested that Terrence keep his distance. Over time, Roderick dropped off everyone's radar, presumably buried in some outlandish research. Now he was gone, leaving behind an estate that, according to the law firm's crisp language, required personal verification on site. His desk AI assistant chimed softly. "Mr. Wynn, Eisen and Farnsworth would like to confirm whether you plan to inspect the property this afternoon. The mansion's internal systems are uniquely old-fashioned. A manual walkthrough is strongly advised." Terrence scrolled through his day's schedule, not much beyond standard data analysis tasks and an afternoon meeting with the robotics branch. None of it seemed pressing enough to overshadow a mysterious family inheritance. "Sure," he said, letting out a resigned sigh. "Schedule it. If the old place requires me in person, I'll go see it." Perhaps the change of scenery would be welcome. Corporate probability forecasts were starting to blend into each other, each day identical to the one before. 3 hours later, Terrence slid into a sleek auto cab. It whisked him away from the bustle of Orchard City's modern districts, crowded blocks of towering glass, toward the fringe where historical preservation efforts kept a pocket of old-world architecture alive. The weather was overcast, drizzling a fine rain that cast a gray sheen over everything. As the cab left the ultramodern highways and glided onto smaller roads lined with grand old trees, Terrence allowed himself a moment of nostalgic awe. He'd heard about this area, but rarely visited. The mansion itself, looming in the swirling mist ahead, felt like a relic from a long-forgotten era. Little did he know that stepping through its threshold would catapult him into a reality so far removed from daily life that it might as well have been another dimension. The cab halted before tall iron gates, which creaked open on ancient hinges that looked older than the city's modern founding. A stone path curved through overgrown gardens. Twisted hedges and clusters of roses stretched toward the mansion's imposing facade. An elaborate three-story structure featuring wooden turrets, intricate molding, and large bay windows. Despite the age, the entire place was astonishingly well kept, as though an invisible caretaker had tended every plank of wood and every vine of ivy. Terrence stepped out, the autopilot chirping a polite farewell before gliding away into the hazy distance. An electronic chime sounded from somewhere near the front door. Terrence approached, uncertain if he should knock. Before his knuckles could meet the wood, the door opened on its own, almost eagerly, like a host excited to receive a long-awaited guest. "Welcome, Mr. Wynn," a synthetic voice greeted, disembodied yet clear. "The estate recognizes you as a Wynn family heir." Terrence hovered there, still half outside. That was unexpected. The law firm had mentioned the house's unusual systems, but he hadn't anticipated an advanced AI greeting him from a centuries-old mansion. Stepping into the foyer, Terrence was struck by an immediate clash of eras. The walls were paneled in dark, polished wood, lit by what appeared to be vintage gas lamps. A wide staircase curved to the second floor, its banisters carved with swirling floral patterns. At the same time, subtle mechanical hums and flickers of light suggested concealed modern technology, maybe some integrated system that Roderick or earlier ancestors had installed. The air smelled of aged books, an aroma Terrence normally found comforting, but there was a second to it as well, a sweet, faintly exotic scent he couldn't identify. Tentatively, he moved deeper into the hall, footsteps muted by plush antique carpets. The strangeness of the environment grew. Corners of rooms seemed to shimmer at the edges, and the geometry of certain doorways made his eyes ache if he stared too long. "Hello?" Terrence called, unsure if he was speaking to a programmed system or something else. His voice reverberated softly as if the walls themselves listened. "Greetings, Terrence Wynn," came a response from above. Spinning, Terrence glimpsed a figure on the upstairs landing. She was poised, graceful, and decidedly inhuman. Her skin held a faint lavender hue, contrasting sharply with the dark Victorian dress she wore, an ensemble both archaic and modernized. Every contour of her features was too symmetrical, her irises glinting with a subdued but unmistakable luminescence. "I have waited for you," she continued, stepping down the stairs with liquid precision, as though gravity were a mere suggestion. "I am Zara, the caretaker of this estate." Terrence tried to find words, but they stuck in his throat. Here was an alien woman, or something close to alien, addressing him as if he were the rightful master of this house. I wasn't aware my uncle had a resident," he managed. "Certainly not." He gestured helplessly toward her luminescent eyes, uncertain how else to articulate the shock. Zara touched a carved banister, her gaze steady on his. "No one in your family has been for a long while. Your great-uncle Roderick believed secrecy was paramount for reasons I'm sure you will soon discover." Her voice, accented with a gentle musical lilt, brought to mind languages Terrence had never heard. "Now that you're here, our arrangement can continue, or perhaps it can change." A slight smile hinted on her lips, but it was the kind of smile that made Terrence question whether it was a friendly welcome or a veiled warning. Zara led Terrence from the foyer into a drawing room where large bay windows revealed a meticulously trimmed rose garden. If the exterior hedges seemed overgrown, this section was the opposite. Neat, symmetrical rows of vibrant blossoms, some in full bloom despite the chill in the air. There was a small table set with a tea service, steam rising from an ornate teapot that looked centuries old. Yet as Terrence stepped closer, the color-shifting designs on the pot indicated advanced technology hidden beneath the antique veneer. He found himself caught between fascination and unease. What exactly had his uncle been doing here? "Please sit," Zara invited, gesturing toward a high-backed chair with exquisite embroidery. She gracefully sank into an adjacent seat, her posture so poised that it felt almost ceremonially formal. As Terrence lowered himself, he noticed how Zara's lavender skin subtly glimmered in the morning light. The sweet, foreign scent became more pronounced in her vicinity, almost like a rare flower or fruit that defied description. He picked up the teacup, carefully sipping the brew. To his surprise, It had a flavor reminiscent of honey and mint, though layered with something floral and mildly effervescent. "You're not human," Terence said at last, feeling a bit foolish for stating the obvious. The caretaker inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Astute. I belong to a people known as the Teleri. We are few on this planet, though once, long ago, our presence was more open. Your great uncle offered me sanctuary, of a sort." Her voice dipped slightly at that last phrase, a note of sadness or nostalgia, though Terence couldn't be sure. He placed his cup on the saucer with a soft clink. "I don't understand. How did you come to be here? And why did Roderick hide you? He was always called eccentric, but this seems beyond eccentric." Zara's gaze shifted to the window where raindrops had begun to tap softly against the glass. "Because humans have historically misunderstood and exploited what they cannot fully grasp. Roderick recognized my existence as something that needed protection. However, it is not merely my presence he guarded. This house is more than wood and stone. It is—" She searched for words, letting a delicate silence stretch before continuing. "It is a nexus, a point of convergence for energies beyond this dimension, and the Teleri were bound to maintain it, for the sake of humanity as well as ourselves." Terence tried to grasp the enormity of what she was saying. A swirl of questions flooded his mind. Dimensional energies, Teleri guardians, a concealed partnership that spanned generations. "So you're telling me my family knew about this? That we've been cooperating with an alien presence?" "Some of your ancestors did," Zara replied softly. "Others turned a blind eye, ignoring their responsibility. Each generation has faced a choice: embrace the mansion's true nature or leave it slumbering. Roderick was the last to fully engage with its deeper mysteries. Now it falls to you." Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Will you continue his legacy, or will you try to break it?" Thunder rumbled distantly, and Terence felt the prickling sense that the house itself was listening. The edges of the drawing room flickered at the corners of his vision, hinting at impossible corridors or hidden expansions. It struck him then, the mansion really did live up to the notion of being more than wood and stone. Another darker thought flickered across his mind. If it was so important, why had Roderick died so suddenly? Was there something more sinister at play? Rising from the chair, Terence paced along the perimeter of the drawing room, scanning the walls. Paintings of long-dead Wynn relatives stared back with austere expressions. Beneath their silent gazes, Terence tried to assemble the pieces Zara had promised: a house tied to other dimensions, a Teleri caretaker, and an uncle who dabbled in secrets bigger than Terence had ever imagined. Could any of it be real? Yet here he stood face to face with an actual alien. The proof was undeniable. He drew a deep breath, then turned back to Zara. "I inherited this place by pure coincidence. I'm not sure I want any part of whatever this is. I have a life back in the city. I parse data and probabilities. I'm not exactly the heroic type." Zara tilted her head, and the soft lighting caught the faint markings on her skin, like swirling constellations just beneath the surface. "Perhaps it chose you because you excel at seeing patterns and outcomes. Your uncle once spoke of your potential. He believed you might understand the deeper threads connecting worlds, even if you never expected such a calling." She stood, her presence commanding. "But if you truly wish to leave, no one can force you to stay. Just know that walking away doesn't mean the Nexus ceases to exist. Others would seek to claim it, and me for their own purposes." Her words conjured an immediate mental image: corporate labs dissecting Zara, or clandestine government agencies trying to harness the mansion's power. A sense of responsibility began to creep over Terence, contradicting his desire to keep his life simple. He still had no idea how far the rabbit hole went, but the moral weight felt real enough. "This is all too much," he muttered, raking a hand through his hair. Before Zara could respond, a sharp buzz sounded from somewhere deeper in the mansion. Terence noticed a subtle shift in her posture, tension seeping into her frame. "We have company," she said, uninvited by the look of it. His mind immediately went to the law firm or perhaps city inspectors, but the trace of apprehension on Zara's face suggested something else entirely. Wordlessly, they made their way down a corridor that seemed to lengthen with every step, the floors and walls subtly warping as though the building was rearranging itself. The hum of concealed machinery rose in pitch. They emerged into a large foyer that Terrence hadn't seen before, despite having just entered the house through a foyer minutes earlier. This new space was slightly bigger, dominated by a wide set of ornate doors. Through stained glass panels, Terrence could see the distorted silhouettes of figures outside. Zara held up a hand. "The house is reacting to their presence," she murmured, her voice laced with caution. "It can sense their intentions." A moment later, the doors burst open, and two individuals in matching dark coats strode into the foyer. They wore discreet earpieces and possessed the kind of posture that screamed official business. The man in the lead raised a palm in greeting, but his expression was anything but friendly. "Mr. Wynn," he said, his voice edged with manufactured politeness. "I'm Soren Lang with the Galactic Charter. We need to discuss this property you have come into possession of." The woman beside him, tall, sharp-eyed, glanced at Zara with a look that was equal parts curiosity and hostility. Unease coiled in Terrence's stomach. He could almost see the outlines of advanced weaponry hidden beneath their coats. Meanwhile, Zara stood like a statue, her silence a testament to controlled restraint. Whoever these charter agents were, they clearly knew more about the mansion and its caretaker than Terrence had moments ago. And as the tension thickened, Terrence had a sinking feeling that his arrival here was about to spark a confrontation far beyond what he was prepared for. Under the polished sheen of the foyer's wooden floors, Terrence could practically feel the house pulsing with intangible energy. The subtle flicker of overhead lamps spoke to a deeper, living mechanism, a system that was wary of the intruders. He noticed Zara's shoulders tense as Soren and his partner took measured steps closer, flanking them with an air of bureaucratic menace. The agents were not brandishing any visible weapons, but something about their stance suggested they could switch from polite to lethal in an instant. Soren produced an ID badge from an inner pocket. Its surface glowed with quantum-verified insignias belonging to the Galactic Charter. "We are authorized to conduct an inspection of this property, effective immediately," he stated, glancing meaningfully between Terrence and Zara. "The Charter has concerns regarding unregulated technology and unregistered entities." "Unregistered entities," Terrence echoed, feeling a spike of anger. The label was impersonal, almost dehumanizing. They were talking about Zara as if she were contraband. "No one mentioned anything about government oversight," he added. "I'm just here to sort out my uncle's estate." Zara's voice emerged in a low, resonant tone. "Your so-called charter has no legal claim here. The Wynn family holds the title, and Roderick Wynn's will has transferred it to Terrence. That includes all property, technology, and residents under this roof." Her luminous eyes locked onto Soren's partner, who seemed to be appraising her with a mix of wariness and curiosity. Soren's expression hardened. "The Charter has the authority to override local property laws when matters of planetary security are at stake," he said. His partner nodded, then fixed her gaze on Terrence. "Mr. Wynn," she began, her voice cooler than Soren's, "I suggest you cooperate. We've encountered phenomena linked to this house that could pose significant danger if mishandled." She cast a glance at Zara, almost as if implying Zara herself was the danger in question. Terrence found himself unexpectedly protective. Something in the Charter's approach triggered all his instincts to shield rather than yield. Maybe it was the memory of Roderick's theories, or the cryptic warning Zara had offered. "I'm not sure what you believe is in here," Terrence said, trying to keep his voice even. "But I was told this is privately held property. If you have an issue, speak with my lawyers." The second agent snorted. "Lawyers won't help you if the planet is at risk." Soren, however, lifted a cautionary hand to silence her. He stepped forward, voice turning measured and cool. "Mr. Wynn, the Charter is well aware of the advanced apparatus your uncle maintained, technology that defies standard classification. We also know about certain anomalies associated with it. We are prepared to offer compensation if you allow us to secure these systems immediately." Terrence glanced at Zara, recalling her warning about those who would happily exploit her and the house. "No deal," he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his tone. "Whatever was Roderick's is now mine, and I'm not signing anything over without a thorough understanding of what's involved." Silence enveloped the foyer for a split second. Then Soren exhaled, his jaw tightening. "So be it," he said quietly, "but don't say we didn't warn you." He reached into his coat and Terrence's pulse quickened, expecting a weapon. Instead, Soren withdrew a compact scanning device. He aimed it at the walls, and lines of swirling greenish light fanned out, collecting data about the mansion's internal structure. Zara tensed visibly, a faint glow emanating from her hands. Even the floor seemed to ripple in defiance. Terrence realized he was at a turning point. If he let them proceed, the charter would root out every secret hidden in this old house, including Zara's. Yet if he resisted, he was stepping into a battle with a powerful entity that likely had significant resources and political backing. Unsure how this would end, but certain he couldn't just roll over, Terrence braced himself for the fallout. The house seemed to come alive. Terrence felt a peculiar vibration under his feet, as if the mansion itself was responding to the charter's invasive scan. Ornate wallpaper began to shimmer, its floral motifs shifting. A low, pulsing drone filled the air, neither entirely mechanical nor wholly organic. Zara shot Terrence a glance that conveyed both warning and reassurance. In the corner of his vision, the corridor he and Zara had just traversed looked longer, as though it stretched into a space that shouldn't exist. What the? Soren's partner took a step back, scanning device wavering. The green lines that had been mapping the interior suddenly bent in odd directions, twisting around themselves. She tapped the device several times as if it had malfunctioned. "Your technology is not welcome here," Zara said softly, though her voice carried a dangerous edge. "You trespass on living ground. This mansion is a conduit, not mere real estate." Soren's eyes narrowed. "You speak as though the building is sentient. That's quite a claim." Zara made no move to elaborate. Instead, she lifted her hand as if gesturing to the intangible energies swirling around them. The floor quivered again, and Terrence heard a sharp creak. Then, to everyone's shock, the wood parted like liquid, revealing a yawning gap beneath the intruder's feet. With startled cries, Soren and his partner toppled through. But before they could disappear completely into the darkness, the house seemed to correct itself. The gap closed just as swiftly, depositing the two agents, visibly shaken, into the same foyer they had just been standing in. They stumbled, disoriented but unharmed. Terrence's heart pounded. He had seen illusions before, cheap holographic projections or VR simulations, but never anything that felt this visceral. The mansion had literally rearranged its physical substance in seconds. He noticed that Soren's scanning device was now sputtering broken sparks, apparently damaged in the sudden shift. "This is insane," Soren's partner spat, regaining her composure but clearly rattled. She glared at Zara, then at Terrence. "Do you even know what you're dealing with, Mr. Wynn?" "No, but I'm starting to get a sense that it's beyond your team's capacity to handle," Terrence retorted, the adrenaline fueling his boldness. Inside, he felt a measure of awe at how the house had acted defensively, almost protectively, against the incursion. Soren motioned for his colleague to stand down, meeting Terrence's gaze evenly. "We are not your enemy," he said, voice clipped with tension. "But we will not let advanced technology or species endanger this planet. If you refuse our help, we'll return officially, and you won't have the option of sending us away." Zara moved behind Terrence, her presence a silent but firm show of solidarity. "We have nothing more to discuss," she said. "Leave while you can." The overhead chandelier flickered with an unsettling brilliance, as though underscoring her statement. With a final glare, Soren stowed the broken scanner. "You've made a mistake, Mr. Wynn," he warned. "You have no idea what forces your uncle was entangled with. The Charter knows more than you think, and ignoring our advice will have consequences." Terrence clenched his jaw but remained quiet. He watched as the Charter agents retreated, coats billowing. The front doors slammed behind them of their own accord, the reverberation echoing through the foyer like the closing of a chapter. Exhaling a shaky breath, Terrence realized that any illusions he'd had of a simple property inheritance had just been shattered. He turned to Zara, who regarded him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She looked more fragile now, the aura of composed invincibility tempered by genuine concern. "I need answers," Terrence said softly, hearing the quake in his own voice. "I'm in way over my head, and if they come back stronger, I need to know what I'm fighting for." Zara reached out, touching his shoulder with gentle pressure. "I will tell you everything I can," she whispered. "But be warned, some truths, once revealed, cannot be contained. Are you prepared to face them?" Terrence wasn't sure, but at this point, with agents threatening from the outside and a dimension-twisting house around him, what choice did he have? Night fell swiftly over Orchard City, the gloom swallowing the mansion's sprawling exterior. Terrence stood in Roderick Wynn's old study, a room cluttered with evidence of unconventional research. Dust motes danced in the glow of an antique desk lamp, revealing stacks of ancient books, loose papers scrawled with formulas, and curious devices that buzzed faintly with unknown power sources. Zara was nearby, scanning one of the shelves lined with texts that seemed older than the mansion itself. She handled each volume with reverent care, as if every page was a delicate artifact. On the desk stood a crystalline sphere the size of a grapefruit, held aloft by a rotating metal cradle. Even from a distance, Terrence sensed it radiated some sort of energy. He felt an odd tug in his chest just looking at it, an unspoken invitation to pick it up. He resisted, recalling how the floor had opened beneath the charter agents earlier. The house, or its occupant energies, clearly didn't shy away from dramatic displays. Zara set a large tome onto a sturdy stand. "Here," she said. "Your uncle left extensive notes, though they are fragmented. He was attempting to decode the mansion's deeper mechanisms, what you might call its heart. The Teleri have always existed in symbiosis with these nodes, but Roderick wanted more than just quiet coexistence." Terrence stepped over to read the open page. The handwriting was tight and slanted, full of arcane symbols interspersed with advanced equations. Words like multiversal bleed and dimensional weave jumped out, each more confusing than the last. "He was a genius," Terrence whispered, half in awe. "But this is beyond anything I learned in advanced mathematics or physics. It's more like some fusion of science and mysticism." Zara nodded, her lavender features flickering with subdued admiration. "Teleri knowledge has always bordered on the spiritual because we sense the intangible threads linking universes. Your uncle was one of the few humans who grasped that physical reality can be shaped from within, not with brute force, but through alignment and resonance. He called it the Wynn legacy, a lineage of curiosity about what lies beyond the veil." "Then why did he keep it secret?" Terrence asked, flipping a page to reveal a hand-drawn diagram of the house's blueprint, overlain with swirling lines that seemed to represent energies coursing through its walls. "Because once this sort of power becomes public, it's coveted by those seeking control," Zara explained. "The Teleri arrived on Earth centuries ago in small numbers, forging alliances with families like yours. Over time, that arrangement morphed into something else." She paused, as though weighing whether to share more. "The Charter is only the latest iteration of that controlling force. Governments, corporations, clandestine groups, they all hunger for what lies within these nodes. Your uncle shielded me from them, but he also believed in forging a different path. He was close to discovering how to reshape the entire network for mutual benefit, not subjugation." Terrence's heart thumped faster. "The entire network? Are you saying there are more places like this mansion? More Teleri caretakers?" "Yes, 12 in total, spread around the globe. Each house is a nexus of dimensional stability. We Teleri are bound to maintain them, though not by choice. For centuries, humans and Teleri have existed in a strained equilibrium, each side keeping secrets, each side fueled by mistrust." Zara turned to lock eyes with Terrence. Roderick believed he could unravel the old, oppressive contracts, but he died before completing the final step. A heavy silence settled. Terrence felt as though the weight of an entire world bore down on him, pressing from all sides. "So, what's the next move?" he asked quietly, noticing the flicker of lightning outside the window. Storm clouds had gathered, swirling ominously over the city below. Zara glanced at the cryptic notes, her expression reflecting both determination and a hint of vulnerability. "That depends on you, Terrence Wynn. Will you let the Charter stake its claim, or will you try to finish what your uncle started?" A rumble of thunder rolled through the mansion's labyrinthine halls, adding a strange, theatrical punctuation to Zara's question. Terrence felt an odd thrill in his veins, equal parts fear and a budding sense of responsibility. The room's antique lamp flickered, revealing more curious objects scattered across the desk. A silver key etched with swirling patterns, a palm-sized device that pulsed faintly with light, perhaps linked to the bigger crystalline sphere. Every item radiated the same aura of half-understood wonder. He reached out to touch the silver key. As his fingers brushed its surface, an electric tingle coursed up his arm. Images flashed in his mind, a swirl of cosmic shapes, glimpses of swirling galaxies, and the faint outline of a figure with lavender skin reaching across a threshold. Gasping, he drew his hand back. What was that? Zara's expression softened. Residue of Teleri memory. Some of our essence can embed in objects. I suspect Roderick constructed or modified these artifacts to work in tandem with me, and now with you. It appears you share a blood connection to the mansion's living systems. So I'm not just a random bystander, Terrence said, swallowing the lump in his throat. In some twisted sense, I was born for this. Thunder cracked again, and both of them glanced at the window. Lightning forked through the sky, illuminating the mansion's ornate grounds. Terrence turned back to Zara. The charter said something about advanced tech, about this house being crucial to planetary security. Is any of that true? A tight line formed on Zara's lips. Yes and no. We Teleri maintain these nodes to stabilize what humans might call dimensional distortions. There are cosmic forces beyond Earth's comprehension, influences that can slip through the cracks if not tended. In that sense, yes, we do provide a security function, but the Charter's approach to it, turning us into tools or weapons, is twisted. They prefer to keep us under control rather than partner with us. And they don't want the public to know the truth about the Teleri or the potential these houses hold. Terrence's mind flashed to the way the floor had opened under the Charter agents. The mansion had protected itself in a rather dramatic manner. And what if they come back? They seem prepared to do whatever it takes to get inside. Are we safe here? Zara gave a wan smile. Safe is relative. The mansion can repel small forces with illusions and spatial manipulation. But should they decide to mobilize in earnest, we may be outmatched by sheer manpower. The other Teleri keepers are scattered, each with their own constraints. We are divided, which makes it easier for the Charter to isolate us. That's exactly how they operate, Terrence said, recalling the agent's ominous threat to return in a more official capacity. The notion of an entire government branch or secret organization bearing down on them sent a chill up his spine. We can't just wait around. Zara lifted her gaze, her lavender irises reflecting the soft lamp glow. Then I propose we stop waiting. We delve deeper into Roderick's work, discover precisely how he planned to free us from the shackles of the old system. And if we succeed, maybe we can protect this world without enslaving anyone. Terrence stared at her, this elegant, otherworldly figure so certain of their shared path. A million doubts churned inside him. Could he really stand against an entity as powerful as the Galactic Charter? Did he have any moral obligation beyond sheer self-preservation? In the end, it all came back to the memory of Roderick, a man who died for secrets Terrence was only now beginning to glimpse. All right, and he said at last, exhaling softly, I'm in, but I want the truth, every layer of it. He glanced around the study, feeling the hum of hidden energies intensify, as if the house itself reacted to his decision. No more half answers. A thoughtful look crossed Zara's face. Agreed, she said, and with that single word, a sense of finality settled over them both. The storm raged outside, lightning illuminating centuries-old walls, as Terrence and Zara prepared to unlock the mansion's deepest mysteries, together. The next morning dawned gray and ominous, a veil of low-hanging clouds obscuring the sun. Terrence Wynn stood on the mansion's expansive front porch, gazing out over the dew-laden grass that spread toward the towering iron gates. Sleep had been elusive, his mind too crowded with revelations about the house, the Teleri, and the Galactic Charter's abrupt interest. He was used to sifting through probabilities in financial markets, not in cosmic conspiracies. Yet here he was, caretaker, if that was even the right word, of something far bigger than he'd ever imagined. A soft rapping of footsteps pulled his attention. Zara joined him, her lavender skin catching the muted light. She'd exchanged the previous Victorian-style gown for more modern attire, though her garments still held an otherworldly flair. You're up early, she observed. Couldn't rest? He shook his head. Dreams kept twisting in on themselves. I kept seeing other houses, flickering like lanterns in the dark. He paused, recalling the Teleri caretaker's revelation that there were 11 other mansions scattered around the globe. I guess the network is in my subconscious now. Zara gave him a sympathetic look. That network is part of your inheritance. When you're attuned to one nexus, you can sense the others in times of heightened emotion. Your Uncle Roderick often spoke of feeling them as well, like distant pulses in the night. Terence exhaled, watching his breath fog in the chilly air. The world beyond the mansion's fence felt strangely distant. Across the lawn, he noticed a small maintenance shed he hadn't paid attention to before. Its sloped roof and wooden sides suggested it was decades old, or older. Any chance that shed holds something useful? He asked, half jokingly, hoping for a stash of antique but functional hardware. With the charter looming, anything might come in handy. Zara followed his gaze. It contains tools but also old records. Your uncle stored lesser-noted experiments there, possibly things he deemed too risky to keep inside. I've never explored it in depth. I had my own realm of secrets to guard. Rubbing the back of his neck, Terence nodded. Might be worth a look. He started down the porch steps, Zara falling in step beside him. The wet grass squelched underfoot, and a mild breeze carried the perfume of autumn leaves. Everything seemed too tranquil, considering that just hours before, charter agents had barged in with veiled threats. Together, they reached the shed, pushing open the squeaking door. Inside, a single overhead light flickered to life, revealing rows of shelves stacked with old crates, notebooks, and contraptions that defied easy labeling. A cold, musty smell lingered in the air, like metal that hadn't been touched in years. Zara's gaze alighted on an old trunk in the corner, half hidden beneath a dusty tarpaulin. That belonged to an earlier generation of Wynns. Roderick used to say it contained half-truths, she said quietly. Half-truths? Terence repeated. With care, he lifted the tarpaulin, then pried open the trunk's creaking lid. Inside lay more papers, each page filled with the sketches of geometric shapes and references to altered states of matter. As Terence leafed through, he realized that these designs resembled the swirling, half-impossible angles he'd glimpsed in the mansion's twisting hallways. One diagram even depicted what looked like a slender, lavender-tinged figure, annotated with lines describing energy conduction. A chill crawled up his spine. This family's legacy went back much further than just Roderick. He was about to ask Zara if she recognized any of the references when an alert chimed in his neurocom unit. Something or someone had crossed the property line. We have visitors, he said, locking eyes with Zara. Her expression hardened, and he could tell they were both bracing for whatever the charter might be planning next. Terence and Zara hurried back to the mansion. Along the way, Zara paused near a bed of out-of-season roses, closing her eyes. A subtle ripple of energy radiated from her, enough that Terence's stomach fluttered in response. I've temporarily raised the property's spatial flux, she explained, turning to him. It'll slow intruders, but if they use stronger methods, I can't guarantee it will hold. They reached the front foyer, and Terence activated the house's surveillance feed from a concealed panel. Tiny holoscreens blossomed midair, each displaying a different angle of the grounds. Beyond the gates, 3 black vehicles hovered in low levitation mode, their matte exteriors reflecting the ominous sky. He recognized the style. Government or paramilitary, certainly not civilian. A ring of men and women in dark uniforms had already begun setting up some sort of device, a cylindrical machine with pulsating green lights. Charter, Terence muttered, and they're not alone. Looks like they brought gear this time. His heart hammered as he switched to an infrared view. The readings indicated high-energy weaponry and scanning equipment. If the last visit was a polite knock, this was a battering ram. Zara's jaw tightened. They've brought harnessed Teleri energy. She pointed at the device. That shade of green is very specific. My people's power, stolen and turned into some kind of dampening field. I've seen them use it in darker times to subdue Teleri guardians who resisted. A wave of indignation and protectiveness coursed through Terence. We can't let them do this to you or to anyone. But he forced himself to take a measured breath. Rushing out, guns blazing, wasn't an option. Not that he had any guns at all. The mansion's illusions could only go so far, and while Zara's capabilities were extraordinary, he doubted she could single-handedly repel an entire squad using stolen Teleri power. Checking the security feeds again, he saw a tall figure step out of the lead vehicle. Even from the grainy footage, Terrence recognized the agent's rigid posture. Soren Lang had returned. Next to Soren stood his partner, the woman with that cold, assessing stare. They exchanged words, pointing at the gate, then at the house. Within moments, the uniformed troops began to advance. "We need to buy time," Terrence said. "We're not ready for a direct confrontation. If they breach the interior, they'll capture you, confiscate everything, and who knows what they'll do with this place." A glimmer of determination shone in Zara's eyes. "Let the mansion shift. I'll guide it." She placed one palm against a nearby wall, her features momentarily going slack as she communed with the house's living essence. The overhead lights flickered, and the floor beneath Terrence's feet vibrated with a quiet hum. An odd sense of vertigo flooded him. It felt like stepping inside a funhouse mirror. Hallways elongated or compacted, door frames wavered, and the windows blurred like watercolors on canvas. Terrence nearly lost his balance when the foyer itself twisted, reorienting so that anyone entering from the front door would be diverted into a new corridor that led nowhere. "We can keep them going in circles," Zara murmured, her hand still pressed to the wall. "But they have the dampening device for Teleri power. If it fully activates, the house's manipulations might weaken." Alarm bells rang louder in Terrence's mind. The intruders were methodically placing strange emitters along the driveway. Each emitter flashed an unsettling green, reminiscent of Zara's aura but corrupted, as if forced into obedience. He thought of the trunk's half-truth sketches, of the older Teleri who might have endured such enslavement. "What about your people?" he asked suddenly, turning to Zara. "Are there others out there who could help?" Her gaze flicked down. "Yes, but they're scattered. The charter likely has them under watch or direct confinement. It's why Roderick was researching a way to unite us without the old contracts. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and all our links are currently under threat." For a moment, both of them stood in silence, the mansion's walls buzzing with tension. Outside, the charter's infiltration proceeded in lockstep, advanced technology pitted against the house's fluid geometry. Whatever came next, Terrence knew they were on a collision course. He recalled Roderick's scattered notes, the talk of rewriting cosmic agreements. Perhaps that was their only hope, to break the chains from the inside out. A crash echoed through the halls. One of the windows on the upper floor shattered, letting in a gust of cold wind. An alarm trilled, and Zara flicked her hand, pulling up a glowing schematic of the house in midair. Tiny red icons blinked where breaches had occurred. The second-floor library, the side conservatory, even a rear entrance once hidden behind ivy. "They're testing multiple points," Zara observed with grim concentration. "They want to see how the house responds, and their stolen Teleri tech is damping certain illusions. I can't seal every gap." Terrence steadied himself, feeling the subtle pitch and roll of the mansion's shifting architecture. "Let's focus on funneling them. If we can't keep them out entirely, maybe we can corral them somewhere easier to handle." He pointed to the mansion's central blueprint, where a long corridor led to a spacious dining hall. "That room has limited exits. We could isolate them, at least temporarily." Zara nodded, recalibrating the house's layout with a motion of her hand. "I'll guide them there." As she concentrated, Terrence felt the wooden panels under his feet ripple in agreement. He realized again this structure was very much alive, in ways he barely understood. Roderick's notes had referred to dimensional synergy, a fancy term that might be a gross understatement. The place wasn't just a building, it was an extension of Teleri existence. From the security feeds, Terrence watched the charter agents appear confused by vanishing hallways and reappearing staircases. Some shouted commands into earpieces. A few advanced carefully, scanning every inch with handheld devices. Others cursed at the flickering illusions. Still, they pressed forward. Soren Lang seemed especially determined, ignoring the spatial anomalies with a stoic resolve that made Terrence's stomach tighten. Within minutes, a small squad of agents found themselves in the eastern corridor leading to the dining hall. Their equipment glowed green, carving through lesser illusions like a knife. But as they neared the tall wooden doors, Zara performed one last rearrangement. The corridor behind them sealed shut, effectively boxing them in. They had no choice but to push into the dining hall. Terrence's calm crackled, catching him off guard. A smooth, dispassionate voice slid through the channel. "Mr. Wynn," it said, "I suspect you are listening." Terrence's gaze darted to the live feed. Soren Lang was staring into a camera lens near the hallway ceiling. "We have no desire to harm you or your property, but you leave us no choice if you insist on these games. We'll use lethal measures if necessary to secure Teleri assets." Gritting his teeth, Terrence tapped a hidden control to respond. "You show up with an armed team, and you call my defensive measures games? That's rich." Soren's voice softened marginally. "I understand your uncle's legacy has you believing we're villains here, but the Teleri arrangement predates you, me, and likely your entire bloodline. We cannot allow an unregulated entity to imperil planetary security. If you stand down, the Charter will guarantee your safety. We can even negotiate terms." As he spoke, more of his personnel fanned out around him, covering every possible angle. A beat of silence stretched. Terrence looked at Zara, who shook her head. He knew from her stories what safety really meant. Forced cooperation and experiments. Potentially centuries more of Teleri servitude. Outside, the dampening device pulsed faster, threatening to diminish Zara's influence over the mansion. "No deal," Terrence finally said, voice cold. "So be it," came Soren's curt reply, and the line went dead. Moments later, an energy charge sizzled through the corridor, slamming into one of the house's shifting walls. A tremor rattled the mansion, and Terrence staggered. Now the real fight was beginning. Within the dining hall, an ornate space with a long mahogany table and crystal chandeliers, 3 Charter soldiers advanced cautiously, their rifles humming with unfamiliar energy. Terrence and Zara watched via a holographic projection from the house's control room, which was hidden behind what appeared to be a decorative tapestry on the first floor. The control room itself bristled with old-fashioned dials, copper wiring, and futuristic screens powered by that same unearthly synergy that permeated every beam of the mansion. Zara's lavender eyes narrowed. "They're using modulated Teleri frequencies to disrupt the dimensional flux. I can't fully warp the space around them anymore." Terrence considered their options. A direct confrontation seemed unwise, but letting the Charter roam freely was even worse. What if we isolate them and then forcibly eject them like last time? Zara's expression faltered. The more they deploy that dampening field, the more precarious any large-scale spatial manipulation becomes. We risk a catastrophic collapse if we try to expel them while their devices are fully active. The house could be damaged, or worse, it could trigger an uncontrollable breach. He didn't need a dictionary to know a breach sounded bad. He recalled the partial glimpses from Roderick's notes, references to cosmic horrors that lurk beyond normal reality, pinned back only by the careful synergy of Teleri guardians and these mansion-like nexuses. Whatever else was going on, unleashing such entities on the world would be a disaster. So do we distract them? Stall until we figure out how to shut down the dampeners? "Yes," she said, exhaling shakily. "But we must be clever. I can maintain partial illusions, but the real solution lies in your uncle's writings. He was close to a breakthrough, something about rewriting the agreement that binds Teleri to these houses and channels. If we can change the terms from forced servitude to mutual cooperation, the Charter's entire premise collapses. Because then they can't claim you're a rogue asset if you're, in effect, a willing partner," Terrence filled in. It made sense in a bizarre, legalistic way. They've based all their authority on the claim that the Teleri must remain regulated. Freeing your people under a new set of cosmic rules would undercut that argument. At that, Zara gave a solemn nod. Precisely. But the rewrite isn't just ink on paper. It's a fundamental shift in how the Teleri network and these dimensional nodes interact. It requires human bloodlines tied to the original contract, like yours, and a Teleri in resonance with at least one nexus, like me. An electronic rumble interrupted them. On the display, Soren Lang stepped into the dining hall, arms folded behind his back. His partner stood at his side, scanning the shimmering air around them. "You have until the count of 5 to submit," Soren announced, voice echoing in the hall's acoustics. "Otherwise, we'll neutralize the caretaker and seize control of this node by force." Terrence's gut twisted. He's serious. They've probably got data from other mansions. They know what happens if they forcibly remove a caretaker. The possibility chilled him. A caretaker-less nexus might collapse or let something monstrous slip through. Perhaps the Charter had a kill switch approach. If they couldn't own the Telluri's power, they'd rather see it all destroyed. Zara placed a trembling hand on Terrence's shoulder. Then we must act quickly. The house is resisting, but the device outside is siphoning more energy every minute. Eventually, even illusions will fail. He nodded, firing up the console that led to Roderick's archived research. Endless lines of text scrolled past, describing ancient rituals, quantum entanglement theories, and Teleri cultural knowledge. Zara's brow furrowed. We need to find the specific sequence, a path that merges Teleri and human energies under voluntary terms. That's the key to rewriting the old contract. But it must happen in the presence of the artifact, an orb your uncle called the Catalyst Sphere. She pointed to the center of the house's schematic, indicating a hidden sub-basement. Roderick moved it there for safekeeping. If we activate it, we can implement the new arrangement, assuming we can hold off the Charter. Despite the tension, Terrence felt a flicker of hope. So, we find the Catalyst Sphere, initiate this rewrite scene, and break the Charter's claim over you. Overall, Teleri, really. He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the monitors showing the armed soldiers. We'll need a distraction to get down there, otherwise they'll follow. Zara closed her eyes, focusing intensely. Give me a moment. I'll weave an illusion strong enough to draw them away from the sub-basement door. You must hurry, though. Outside the control room, faint tremors shook the walls, indicating the Charter was growing bolder. The countdown had begun, and the entire mansion, and perhaps more, hung in the balance. Zara's illusion began with a subtle shift in the air. It resonated through the corridors, creating echoes of footsteps and whispers that lured the Charter Squad down the wrong hallway. On the monitors, Terrence saw a half-dozen uniformed agents spin around reacting to phantom threats. One soldier called out, "Over there!" only for his energy rifle to blast harmlessly into a wall. Sparks flew, but the illusions danced on, pulling them deeper into the mansion's labyrinth. Taking that as his cue, Terrence slipped into an unassuming hallway near the study. The house obliged him by folding space slightly, revealing a narrow door behind a bookcase. Years ago, Roderick must have crafted this hidden route to the sub-basement. Heading down the creaking steps, Terrence switched on his flashlight. Pale beams illuminated a passage of rough stone that felt utterly different from the ornate rooms above. Pipes ran along the walls, drips of condensation echoing in the silence. The temperature dropped with every step. At the end of the passage lay a large metal hatch. Terrence paused, every nerve on edge. The door had an embedded panel with swirling Teleri runes, and the mere sight made his fingertips tingle. A small handprint icon blinked red, prompting him to place his palm against it. He held his breath and pressed down. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a faint glow spread beneath his hand, turning from red to a soft violet hue. With a hiss, the hatch unlocked and swung open. Beyond, a spacious chamber spread out, reminiscent of an underground cathedral. Pale green crystals jutted from the walls, casting eerie reflections across what appeared to be a circular platform in the room's center. Terrence stepped forward, heart pounding. In the middle of that platform floated an orb as large as a beach ball, suspended in a column of shimmering light. The orb's surface rippled like liquid glass, radiating a quiet hum that resonated in Terrence's bones. This must be the Catalyst Sphere, he murmured. Roderick's notes had described it as a dimensional anchor, essential for bridging Teleri energy and human lineage. If that rewriting sequence was locked inside it, they might have just found their salvation, or the world's ruin if they messed up. He circled the orb, glancing at a console covered in archaic switches and levers next to more modern holographic interfaces. Realizing he had no time to waste, Terrence scrolled through the console's readout, scanning for anything resembling a rewrite or override command. One subroutine glowed with a name, Protocol Insight. Could that be the key? He activated it. Lines of text scrawled across a screen in frantic arcs, referencing Teleri genetic signatures, Wynn family genealogies, and something Roderick labeled about metastable contract integration. The complexity rivaled anything Terrence had encountered in his corporate quantum analyses. Yet a persistent sense of familiarity bloomed in his mind, as if his uncle's code had been designed to tap into whatever unique skill set Terrence possessed. He found a final step, highlighted in bold script. Require Teleri and Wynn bond. Perform synchronous touch upon catalyst sphere. Initiate voluntary merger. His pulse jumped. He needed Zara here. Her presence, her energy, if they were to unify the Teleri side with the human side. Without her, the best Terrence could do was read instructions. A rumble overhead jarred him from his thoughts. Dust trickled from the ceiling. He guessed the charter was escalating, possibly setting charges against the mansion's defenses. A spike of panic shot through him. Zara might be in danger, or the illusions might be failing. Clenching his jaw, he wondered if he should run back to find her or trust she'd find a way to meet him here. Time was ticking, and the next move could shape both their fates. Above ground, Zara stood in the main foyer, breath coming in shallow gasps. A dozen illusions flickered around her. Some conjured forms of Teleri apparitions, others rearranged hallways intended to mislead. She was pushing herself to the brink, each new mental construct draining more energy than the last. The charter's dampening devices cast a heavy, green pall over the mansion, making the illusions less stable. Perspiration dotted her brow, and her normally luminescent skin appeared dulled. A group of charter soldiers advanced, rifles at the ready. Their leader, a square-jawed man with a grim expression, signaled for them to spread out. They moved with methodical precision, scanning for any sign of Zara. She crouched behind a tall column, carefully controlling her breathing. It wouldn't be long before they detected her energy signature. She pressed her hand against the floor, silently invoking the mansion's architecture. It responded, but sluggishly. Walls shimmered, trying to shift. A corridor behind the soldiers elongated, but only partially. The lead soldier barked an order, and one of them fired a spherical device that clamped onto the wall, emitting an amplified pulse. Instantly, Zara felt a lurch as the illusions there collapsed. Her head throbbed, and she swallowed a surge of nausea. "Where is she?" the soldier hissed. "We need direct line of sight to subdue her." Steps echoed closer. They were almost upon her. Summoning her last reserves, Zara conjured a burst of illusions, a swirl of shapes and sounds that erupted in the foyer. Figures darted through the air, half real. An ornate chandelier turned into a writhing serpent of light, hissing and coiling. Distracted, the soldiers fired wildly, energy bolts ricocheting off marble and plaster. One beam shattered a stained glass panel overhead, spraying shards onto the polished floor. Soren Lang's voice crackled through the squad's comms. "Cease random firing," he commanded. "Concentrate on the caretaker. Neutralize her illusions, then incapacitate her. We need her alive for a controlled extraction." Zara gritted her teeth, struggling to maintain the dizzying display. With each second, she hoped Terrence was safely underground, preparing the rewrite. She had to buy him time, but her strength was fading, the stolen Teleri field pressing like a suffocating blanket over her senses. Through the confusion, a soldier managed to spot her behind the column. He aimed his rifle. Reacting on pure instinct, Zara leapt to the side, rolling behind an overturned table. A beam of crackling green energy scorched the column, leaving a dark stain. She scrambled to her feet, forcing the illusions to intensify. The swirling, hypnotic forms multiplied, each a prismatic echo. For a moment, the soldiers seemed paralyzed, uncertain which phantoms were real. That bought her only seconds, however. Another dampening pulse rippled through the mansion, collapsing illusions in a cascade of fading light. The recoil hit Zara like a punch to the gut, driving the air from her lungs. She stumbled. Before she could regain her balance, a gloved hand gripped her arm, yanking her backward. A second soldier pinned her other arm, their rifles pointed at her head. "You've done quite enough," snarled the first, voice muffled behind a tactical visor. He radioed for backup. Zara tried to summon any scrap of Teleri energy left, but her limbs felt leaden. A final pulse from the dampening device shattered the last illusions in the foyer. The swirling lights vanished, revealing the battered walls and broken glass. Zara's own glow flickered to near darkness. Bound at both arms, she closed her eyes, mustering a calm she didn't feel. If Terrence was successful, maybe this wouldn't end in another century of servitude for her people. But right now, in the cold grip of charter soldiers, she felt more vulnerable than she ever had before. Terrence paced at the base of the sub-basement, eyes fixed on the catalyst sphere. The overhead rumbling had grown more violent, And he knew time was running short. The rewriting sequence spelled out that he and Zara must simultaneously touch the orb. How could they accomplish that if she was upstairs, likely fighting for her life? He turned to the console again, scanning for any fail-safe or remote method. One line stood out, scrawled in Roderick's hand. In caretaker's absence, second pathway is caretaker's blood imprint. Terrence blinked, not fully grasping what that entailed. Did he need some essence of Zara's Teleri energy? How was he supposed to get it without her here? A quake rumbled, throwing him off balance. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. The resonance from above sharpened, a sign that something was draining Zara's power or beating her illusions. Desperate, Terrence raked his mind for a solution. One possibility lurked at the edges of his thoughts: the silver key from Roderick's desk. Zara had mentioned Teleri memory could be embedded in objects. Perhaps the key carried some imprint of her caretaker energy from previous interactions. He checked his pockets. No key. He must have left it behind in the upstairs study. Cursing under his breath, he weighed his odds. Racing back up to retrieve it meant dodging charter troops. But what other choice did he have? He couldn't activate the rewrite alone. Steeling himself, Terrence sprinted back up the narrow passage. The door to the main house parted, revealing chaos in the once elegant corridors. Walls flickered with partial illusions, the architecture half reconfigured. One corridor ended abruptly in a swirl of shimmering mosaic, another bent at a dizzying angle. Broken glass glittered across the floor, and the stench of scorched wood hung in the air. A figure darted past, one of the charter soldiers shouting to another. Terrence ducked behind a toppled cabinet, heart pounding in his ears. He crept through the mayhem, stepping gingerly over debris and shattered furniture. Every so often, a flicker of Teleri light illuminated a hallway, only to fade immediately as the dampening field intensified. Finally, he reached the second-floor study, a room that felt eerily still compared to the rest of the mansion. Overturned chairs and scattered documents gave it a ransacked appearance. He scanned the floor, searching frantically for the silver key. There, half buried beneath a pile of books, its etched surface gleamed faintly. Grabbing it, Terrence closed his eyes. That same spark of energy coursed through him, images flooding his mind. Zara touching the key with a delicate finger, Roderick performing some ritual, the swirling alignment of Teleri lines. "This has to be it," Terrence whispered, clutching the key tight. He turned to go, but stopped. Movement in the doorway caught his eye. Soren Lang stood there, a pistol-like device aimed directly at Terrence's chest. "That key is not yours," Soren said evenly. He stepped into the study, eyes flicking around as if verifying Terrence was alone. "I'd advise you to hand it over. We can still salvage this situation if you cooperate." Terrence backed away, mind racing. "How do I know you haven't already killed Zara?" He spat, wanting to keep the conversation going while he searched for a potential escape. The study's windows had been reinforced long ago. Jumping out wasn't an option. Soren tilted his head. "The caretaker is alive, albeit subdued. We're not butchers, Mr. Wynn, but we can't let an alien species run amok with technology that could tear open dimensional rifts. Give me the key, walk away, and we'll ensure your safety." A bitter laugh escaped Terrence's lips. "Right. My safety in exchange for a lifetime of exploitation of the Teleri. No thanks." His grip on the key tightened. If it truly contained caretaker essence, maybe it could help him do something, though he had no clear plan. Soren's eyes narrowed, his voice turning sharper. "I won't ask again." Outside, lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the study in harsh white. Time slowed in Terrence's mind. He considered rushing Soren, but the agent's posture suggested he'd shoot without hesitation. Another option: the illusions had mostly failed upstairs, but maybe the key could trigger something, even a minor distraction, long enough for Terrence to flee. For better or worse, he had to decide now. Terrence acted on impulse. He held the key out, just enough to catch Soren's eye, then jabbed it into the nearest wall panel, a decorative inlay that had once concealed some of Roderick's devices. A jolt of energy crackled, and for an instant, reality around them rippled. The air distorted, colors bending like oil on water. Soren's aim faltered as he staggered, momentarily disoriented by the phenomenon. Terrence seized that moment. He dove sideways, knocking over a small table to obstruct Soren's line of fire. A sharp crack rang out as Soren pulled the trigger, but the shot went wide, sizzling into a bookshelf. Books burst into flame, filling the study with acrid smoke. Terrence coughed, his eyes stinging, but he kept moving. Navigating blind, he shouldered into the corridor, keys still clutched in his trembling hand. Behind him, Soren cursed, hacking as smoke billowed through the study. Terrence heard the agent's footsteps closing in, but the swirling illusions from the key partially obscured the hallway. Distantly, Terrence sensed they wouldn't last. The dampening device was still active, eroding everything Teleri-based. A single objective pulsed in Terrence's mind: get to the sub-basement with the key. Zara was captured, but maybe he could still initiate the rewrite if the key truly contained her imprint. For all he knew, it was a long shot. But the alternative, allowing the charter to seize everything, was far worse. He sprinted down the corridor, half choking on the lingering smoke. Now and then the mansion's broken illusions flickered, creating false doorways or warped angles that nearly tripped him. A scorched banister gave way under his weight, and he tumbled partway down a flight of stairs, landing hard on his shoulder. Pain flared, but adrenaline shoved it to the periphery of his mind. A voice echoed distantly. He's heading for the lower levels. That had to be Soren or one of his soldiers. How they even knew his trajectory, Terrence couldn't guess. Maybe the charter scanners were picking up his movement, or they simply guessed he'd seek out the heart of the node. Skidding across the foyer, its marble floors scarred by bullet holes and energy blasts, Terrence flung himself toward the hidden control room. Instead of entering it, he found the concealed panel leading to the sub-basement. Throwing his weight against it, he yanked the door open and slammed it behind him. He engaged a manual lock, though he doubted it would do more than slow them. Down the cramped passage he raced, the gloom pressing in. The seconds ticked by with suffocating weight. Soon they'd break through. Would the rewriting even function without Zara present? Would the key's embedded essence suffice? Terrence reached the sub-basement chamber and nearly fell to his knees. The orb hovered, glowing faintly. He approached, chest heaving, and pressed the silver key to its surface. An immediate surge of energy knocked him backward, and the entire basement thrummed. The catalyst sphere rippled, threads of greenish-violet light snaking across its liquid-like facade. It was reacting to something. Maybe the caretaker imprint bound in the key. "Please work," Terrence choked out, forcing himself upright. A new set of instructions lit up on the console. Caretaker imprint detected. Proceed with voluntary override? N. Heart pounding, Terrence selected yes. Lines of glyphs cascaded across the screen, forming an intricate mandala of Teleri and human symbols. A low-frequency hum rattled the chamber, and Terrence glimpsed a swirl of shifting probabilities behind his eyelids, an echo of the cosmic interplay Roderick had tried to master. Suddenly, the hatch upstairs exploded inward. Soldiers poured in, weapons at the ready. Terrence braced for gunfire. But in that instant, the orb flared with a brilliant flash that enveloped the chamber. He heard shouts, cries of alarm, then everything drowned in searing light and a feeling of cosmic displacement, like stepping between parallel realities. Somewhere in that glare, Terrence swore he heard Zara's voice whisper, "We are not bound. We are free." Then the world dissolved, leaving only raw, luminescent power in the beating of his frantic heart. The world collapsed into brilliance. Terrence Wynn floated in a sea of white, feeling as though every cell in his body vibrated. Sensation was both overwhelming and distant. He caught flickers of movement across this luminous void, shapes that might have been stars or geometric constructs. Roderick's notes had described some kind of transcendent in-between, but experiencing it firsthand was altogether more disorienting. Gradually, the intensity dimmed, and Terrence realized his feet were still planted on solid ground, or what felt like it. The underground chamber reappeared around him in fading pulses of light. The crystalline walls shimmered, and the catalyst sphere floated with renewed vigor at the center. Gunmetal gray shapes coalesced off to the side. Charter soldiers, confused and stumbling, their weapons sparking erratically. Whatever wave of energy Terrence had unleashed had knocked them off balance, and now they crouched in a defensive huddle, blinking as though half-blinded. One figure lay prone near the entrance, a woman soldier pinned beneath a twisted piece of collapsed metal framework. Terrence was startled to see any structural damage at all. He guessed the energy surge had caused partial cave-ins or distortions. The sphere's activation was no gentle process. Meanwhile, Terrence's entire body hummed with a resonance he could barely contain. His vision sparkled with after-images, like shards of a kaleidoscope. In those shards, he saw glimpses of a Teleri caretaker, Zara, and heard an echo of her voice. "We are not bound. We are free." Was that real or some psychic imprint? The console near the sphere beeped incessantly, displaying status updates that Terrence could hardly read. His mind was bombarded by too many stimuli. Struggling to steady himself, he looked for the silver key. It lay on the ground, battered and still faintly glowing, as if exhausted by the ordeal. Nearby, two charter soldiers tried to stand, only to stumble again under the swirling energies that still permeated the space. One reached for his gun, but a surge of static zapped through the barrel, forcing him to drop it with a cry. Terrence didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. He certainly hadn't intended to kill anyone, but this wave of raw power was unpredictable. He had only intended to initiate the rewriting Roderick had envisioned, not tear the mansion apart. His heart lurched at the thought of Zara. If the rewriting had succeeded, she should be liberated from the charter's dampening field. But that was assuming she'd survived the conflict upstairs. Terrence had to believe she was still alive. Gritting his teeth, he staggered toward the console. A swirl of blinking text told him the rewrite had begun, but would not be complete until both caretaker and designated heir, Teleri and human, had converged within the node's core. Partial caretaker imprint could start the process, yet the final step required Zara's living presence, not just an echo and an artifact. He glanced over his shoulder. The soldiers were too busy recovering to notice him slipping away. Gulping in a lungful of the ozone-scented air, he hurried toward the stairs. The gunmetal walls seemed to exhale with each of his steps. A disquieting thought flickered. If he and Zara failed to fully merge their energies, the rewriting might remain incomplete. And if it remained incomplete, the old contract constraints would stay in force. Or worse, the entire network might collapse into chaos. Clutching the battered key, Terrence prayed that Zara was still conscious, and that he could reach her before the charter regained its footing. Upstairs, the mansion resembled a war zone. Sections of the ceiling had caved in, scattering splinters and chunks of plaster across the once lustrous floors. Smoke wafted from a dozen small fires where stray energy blasts had ignited upholstery. The swirling illusions were mostly gone, replaced by half-formed corridors and a few ghostly shapes that flickered erratically. Terrence knew the Teleri power that fueled them was in chaos, following his uncoordinated activation of the catalyst sphere. He hurried past the wreckage of an overturned piano, stepping carefully around shattered wooden beams. Distantly, he heard the crackle of firearms and shouted orders. The charter still had squads roaming the mansion, but they sounded scattered and disorganized. Perhaps they'd also been hit by the shockwave from below. Terrence emerged into what remained of the main foyer, heart hammering as he surveyed the destruction. The chandelier lay crumpled on the marble floor, and broken glass from tall windows glinted everywhere. Leaning against a fallen statue was none other than Zara. She looked dazed, her lavender skin dull and a smear of ash streaked across her cheek. Two charter soldiers sprawled on the floor near her, either unconscious or incapacitated. It seemed she'd managed to fight them off, or the energy surge had done it for her. His chest tightened with relief. "Zara!" he shouted, picking his way over debris to reach her. She lifted her gaze slowly, blinking as if coming out of a dream. She tried to stand but stumbled, and Terrence caught her, easing her weight against him. "Terrence," she whispered, sounding exhausted. "I felt your surge. The rewriting has begun. It's like lightning in my veins, but I couldn't stabilize it from up here." Her voice quivered, and she cast a pained glance around the wrecked foyer. "I started it, but it's not complete," Terrence said, voice tight with urgency. He held up the silver key. "I used the caretaker's imprint embedded in this, but the system says it needs the real you." Zara inhaled, shaky but determined. "Then we must go to the catalyst sphere. That's the central node for the rewriting." She tried to take a step, but her knees buckled. Terrence wrapped an arm around her waist, supporting her. He realized just how physically drained she was, probably from both the dampening field and her continuous use of illusions. Gunfire echoed from an adjacent hallway, followed by a shower of sparks. The charter was still present, still armed, and definitely still dangerous. Terrence cast a quick look over his shoulder. No sign of immediate pursuit, but they had to move now. "Come on," he urged, guiding Zara toward the corridor that led to the sub-basement hatch. Each step was an ordeal. Dust and smoke clogged the air. They navigated sections where the mansion's structure had partially warped, forcing them to sidestep twisted beams. Zara's breath grew ragged, yet she pressed on, leaning on Terrence for balance. Through the swirling haze, they glimpsed more unconscious or disoriented soldiers. Some had likely been thrown against walls by the wave of energy. Others were pinned under fallen debris. A flicker of sympathy crossed Terrence's mind. They were adversaries, yes, but he hadn't wanted to kill anyone. He tried to focus on the bigger picture. Free the Teleri, end the charter's stranglehold, and prevent the house from disintegrating in a cosmic meltdown. At last, they reached the hidden hatch. A swirl of scorched metal around the edges indicated the charter had attempted to blast through it, but the thick door still held. Terrence keyed in the access code and the hatch groaned open. Carefully, he helped Zara down the narrow stairs, the air growing colder with each step. She trembled, though whether from injury or the raw energies coursing through her veins, he couldn't say. "We have to do this," Zara murmured, clinging to his arm. "The rewriting, or everything falls apart." Terrence steeled himself. Down below, the catalyst sphere beckoned, and with it, the chance to reshape centuries of pain if they survived the process. When they finally reached the sub-basement chamber, Terrence felt the same humming resonance as before, but stronger. The catalyst sphere's glow pulsed like a living heartbeat, casting prismatic light across the cavernous walls. The consoles around the perimeter flickered with lines of text, some in Teleri script, others in Roderick's messy English scrawl. The half-collapsed entrance still smoldered from the wave of energy that had blasted through moments ago. Nearby, 2 charter soldiers lay unconscious. Another was attempting to crawl away, but he looked too disoriented to pose a threat. Zara's eyes fixed on the orb. "It's awakened," she breathed, awe and dread mixing in her voice. "Our energies are bridging worlds, but the process is incomplete, chaotic." Terrence helped her limp onto the raised platform surrounding the sphere. "What do we have to do?" he asked, scanning the console for any instructions. The screen displayed swirling diagrams that reminded him of fractals. It seemed to depict 2 energy streams, one labeled Teleri and another YYN, spiraling around each other without locking into place. Zara steadied herself, one hand pressed to her ribs as though in pain. "We complete the bond. A caretaker cannot rewrite the contract alone. A willing human from the original bloodline must join. That is what Roderick wanted, but never achieved. We must both voluntarily merge our essence with the catalyst sphere." A tremor of uncertainty ran through Terrence. "Merge our essence, you mean permanently?" Zara managed a faint, rueful smile. "Not exactly. It's more like forging a link that cannot be undone casually. I won't claim there isn't risk. If it fails, both of us could be consumed." Her voice dropped on the last word, revealing her fear. He swallowed hard, flashing on the memory of Roderick's warnings about cosmic forces beyond comprehension. But also, he remembered the unwavering sense of responsibility he felt to stop the charter's exploitation and free Zara's people. "Let's do it," he whispered, voice firm despite the adrenaline surging in his veins. They approached the orb, which rippled with each sip as though sensing their presence. Zara set one hand on its surface, and Terrence followed suit, the sphere's energy buzzing through his fingertips like electric current. Instantly, a wave of color cascaded over them both, shimmering ribbons of violet, green, and silver. Terrence's mind was flooded with visions. Alien worlds, Teleri ancestors stepping through dimensional portals, early Wynn family members forging pacts in hidden grottos. He gasped, overwhelmed by the barrage of images. Zara's presence flared in his consciousness, not as a separate entity, but entwined with his own thoughts. He felt her emotions, centuries of pain and longing for freedom, but also flashes of hope whenever a Wynn heir displayed compassion. Equally, she saw Terrence's life. Mundane corporate offices, late-night coffee, and an early childhood overshadowed by a family that dismissed Roderick's eccentricities as lunacy. Gradually, the swirling fractals on the console screen synchronized, the Tellery and Wynn spirals locking into a singular helix. A new message replaced the chaotic lines. Voluntary covenant established? Proceed? Zara and Terrence nodded in unison, though no words passed their lips. The sphere pulsed with brilliant light, so dazzling that Terrence felt his consciousness slip beyond his physical senses. Everything dissolved into a final searing flash. When sight and sound returned, Terrence stood in the same sub-basement, yet it felt altered. The harsh overhead lights no longer flickered, and the walls seemed infused with a subtle, comforting glow. He withdrew his hand from the catalyst sphere, realizing with a sharp intake of breath that he could still sense Zara, even though they were not in physical contact. A gentle presence brushed against his thoughts. Hers, yet not intrusive. It was like sharing a mindscape but maintaining individual boundaries. Zara exhaled, her lavender skin pulsing faintly with renewed vigor. The lines of exhaustion on her face eased, and when she turned to him, her eyes shimmered with quiet wonder. "It worked," she said, voice trembling with relief. "The old contract is dissolved. The new covenant, it's established on equal terms, Terrence. We've done it." He rubbed his temples, which buzzed as if 1,000 radio frequencies had suddenly gone silent. "I can feel the network," he whispered, awe creeping into his voice. "It's like I know where the other Teleri nodes are, an awareness that's faint but real." He sensed distant beacons, each representing another caretaker and another mansion. The oppressive hush that once chained them seemed lifted. "Every caretaker is now free to serve or step away, by choice," Zara explained. That was Roderick's dream. No more forced servitude, no more hidden captivity. And for those who remain caretakers, they'll protect humanity from dimensional threats as partners, not as prisoners. A faint rumble from above snapped Terrence back to the present. The mansion might be stabilizing, but the charter still had soldiers scattered around, possibly more inbound. He noted the disoriented soldier who'd been crawling in the corner was now sitting upright, arms slack. Confusion radiated from him as he stared at Zara and Terrence, as though he no longer recognized them as targets. "Are we safe from them now?" Terrence asked, his tone dripping with uncertainty. The momentary peace in the sub-basement felt fragile. Zara's gaze flicked to the soldier. "I sense a shift in the mansion's energies. The dampening devices shouldn't function the same way under the new covenant. Our joint presence fortifies this node in ways the charter can't easily undermine." Curious, Terrence beckoned the soldier closer, though cautiously. The man's uniform bore a rank insignia, likely a sergeant. He lifted his eyes to Terrence, looking almost timid. I I can't hear Soren's orders anymore," he murmured, glancing at his malfunctioning earpiece. "Everything went static after that blast. I don't know what's happening." Terrence crouched, maintaining a respectful distance. "You're inside a dimensionally active structure that just rewrote the fundamental contract binding Teleri to these houses. If you stand down, no one else needs to get hurt. Understood?" The soldier's gaze flitted between Terrence and Zara, as if unsure whether to treat them as enemies. But eventually he nodded, letting his rifle clatter to the floor. He looked exhausted, disarmed more by the cosmic shift than by force. A shaky breath escaped Terrence. "We should head upstairs. The rest of the charter might still be trying to regroup. Our illusions can't last forever, but hopefully, the new state of things will disorient them enough that we can avoid further violence." Zara touched the catalyst sphere one final time, as if saying a silent goodbye, or perhaps greeting it as an equal. The orb glowed softly and then dimmed to a steady, rhythmic pulse. She turned to Terrence and offered a faint but resolute smile. "Yes, let's end this. We've already changed the rules of the game. Now let's see if the charter is willing to adapt or collapse under its own lies." They emerged into the ground floor to find the mansion in a surreal state of flux. Walls had partially repaired themselves, and illusions floated like faint ghosts, non-threatening remnants of old defenses that no longer needed to lash out. Curls of smoke lingered in corners, but many small fires had sputtered out, as if starved of fuel or extinguished by the mansion's shifting environment. A handful of charter soldiers stumbled through the corridors, some of them in a daze, others quietly helping wounded comrades. It seemed the massive discharge from the basement had sapped their aggression or at least disrupted their chain of command. Terrence and Zara navigated cautiously, still expecting someone to open fire. In the main foyer, they found Soren Lang, his usually immaculate uniform torn, his face bruised and streaked with soot. He stood near a collapsed pillar, leaning on it for support. Beside him was his partner, the sharp-eyed woman who earlier had demanded Terrence's cooperation. She clutched an injured arm, but her gaze remained fierce. At the sight of Terrence and Zara, Soren's eyes narrowed. He glanced down at the energy pistol in his hand, but made no move to raise it. "So," he managed, voice rough with fatigue, "you pulled off whatever that was. My comms are useless. The dampening devices outside have gone offline. We're cut off from Central Command." Zara stepped forward with measured calm, her tone holding a surprising gentleness. "Then consider this a diplomatic opportunity. Your charter claimed to protect Earth from the Teleri. In truth, you enslaved my people. That system no longer exists." A flicker of anger crossed Soren's features. "We were protecting humanity from dimensional threats. Your threats." He coughed, wincing from what might have been broken ribs. "Without forced compliance, who's to say you won't open the floodgates?" Terrence cut in, voice steady, though his heart hammered. "Because we don't want to. Zara's people never wanted Earth destroyed. They've been guarding these dimensional nodes since before your charter even existed. That's the entire point. This arrangement, this voluntary bond, is more secure than anything you forced on them." The sharp-eyed woman spat a bitter laugh. "You speak as though the Teleri are altruistic saints. We've got records, multiple caretaker rebellions, sabotage that almost led to citywide disasters. Millions could have died." Zara's face tightened with remorse. "Yes, there have been rebellions. Some Teleri, driven to desperation by captivity, lashed out. If you cage any being for long enough, they might strike the bars. But now the cage is gone. There will be no reason for sabotage." Silence descended in the foyer, broken only by the crackle of settling debris. Soren eyed Zara, Terrence, then the battered remains of his own men. Something heavy sagged in his posture, as if he realized how thoroughly undone their mission was. At length, he gritted his teeth and hissed, "The charter won't stand for this. They'll call in reinforcements, possibly from orbit." Terrence shared a quick glance with Zara. A faint sense of confidence flowed between them, the new tether reminding him that they were no longer alone. "Good luck with that," Terrence said quietly. "Your superiors have just lost the entire basis for their Teleri crackdown. The other mansions, nodes, are free too. Any reinforcements will face the same shift in reality." Zara's energy presence pulsed. "We're willing to negotiate with any human authority that acknowledges this new status quo. But forced subjugation is over. If the charter insists on war, they will lose, because you cannot control what is no longer bound by your contracts." Soren slumped against the pillar. His partner looked away, as if stung by the realization. The hush that followed spoke volumes, an admission that they'd been outmaneuvered on a fundamental, cosmic level. Whether they called it victory or devastation might depend on perspective. In the days that followed, the mansion's battered structure mended itself in unexpected ways. While it didn't magically revert to a pristine state, the Teleri energies, now strengthened by Terrence and Zara's shared bond, helped restore essential support beams and seal cracks that otherwise would have led to major collapses. The charter had retreated under Soren's order, limping away with wounded soldiers and broken gear. A tension-filled ceasefire took shape as news spread that all Teleri mansions worldwide had, in near unison, rejected the old forced contracts. Terrence found himself in a surreal new role, part owner, part diplomat, part guardian. The Teleri network's pulse was always at the back of his mind, a subtle hum reminding him that his link to Zara was more than symbolic. He sensed changes occurring at other nodal houses across the globe. Some Teleri caretakers, liberated from centuries of compulsion, chose to reveal themselves openly to local communities, sparking a global shockwave of curiosity and confusion. Governments scrambled to establish policies, journalists demanded answers, and conspiracies flourished online. Amidst the chaos, the Galactic Charter faced internal crisis. Leaked documents, apparently released by dissenters within their own ranks, confirmed the centuries-long exploitation of Teleri energy. Public opinion turned against them, forcing the Charter's leadership to announce a suspension of activities pending international and interplanetary review. Soren and his field teams, once the spearhead of Charter enforcement, found themselves in a bureaucratic limbo. Meanwhile, Zara grew stronger each day. She reclaimed her caretaker role under the new covenant, no longer shackled by the old strictures. Terrence noticed that her illusions and reality shaping had a gentler quality, less frantic and desperate than before. She even found time to admire the small things, like the way the rose gardens rebounded from the previous destruction. "I don't have to hide or fight for my existence anymore," she confided. "It's disarming. Wonderful but terrifying in its own way." Terrence understood the feeling. He, too, wrestled with the abrupt shift in life circumstances. He tried returning to his corporate boss for a day, only to find his focus fractured by the cosmic hum in his head. After the second meltdown in a row, he resigned, something he'd never have dared do in his old routine. Yet with the mansion needing a caretaker presence, and with so many new responsibilities, it felt like the logical step. "I'll be busy enough rewriting family history," he joked to a stunned HR representative, who hadn't a clue what he really meant. One evening, Zara led him to the sub-basement again. The catalyst sphere now rested in a quiescent state, glowing faintly with each breath of dimensional energy. "Since the rewriting, the node is stable," she explained, placing a hand on the orb's surface. A faint echo of their bond fluttered through Terrence's mind. "But we should ensure no other force can hijack it. The house is still a point of power that unscrupulous factions might covet." Terrence nodded, imagining rogue corporations or even alien entities from beyond Earth's sphere, salivating at the prospect of weaponizing Teleri power. "We'll need open collaboration with actual global authorities, I suppose," he mused, feeling no particular excitement about bureaucratic negotiations. Still better to deal with them openly than to fight in secret. Zara let her hand slip away from the orb, turning a gentle smile on Terrence. "Look how far we've come. Perhaps for the first time in centuries, Teleri and humanity can approach each other without chains or illusions. That alone is worth the challenges ahead." They retreated upstairs to see that the evening sky was clear, stars blinking in a crisp tapestry. The old mansion stood, battered but resolute, a symbol of a new era nobody had predicted. And Terrence Wynn, ex-data analyst, felt oddly at peace with a role he would never have chosen if fate hadn't thrust it upon him. A week later, a delegation arrived at the mansion's front gates. Their vehicles bore the insignia of an international council, formed hastily in the wake of the Charter's downfall. Terrence and Zara watched from a second-floor balcony as suits and uniforms alike stepped onto the lawn. Unlike the Charter's earlier incursions, these newcomers carried no overt weapons. Instead, they brought official documents and scanning devices meant to record, not assault. The leading official was Dr. Helene Kurum, a calm-faced woman who extended a cautious hand toward Zara upon entering the foyer. Zara, to Terrence's relief, accepted the gesture with grace. He noticed the tension in Zara's posture, though, the old fear of human institutions still lingering, even if the circumstances had changed. Dr. Kurum introduced herself as the interim coordinator for Earth-Teleri relations, a position that didn't exist until a few days ago. She bowed slightly, an unexpected sign of respect. "We come to request your cooperation, yours and that of other caretakers," she said. "We're trying to address the uncertainties surrounding these dimensional nodes. Nations are concerned about security, but we're determined not to repeat the Charter's mistakes." Zara inclined her head. "That is encouraging to hear. For too long, Teleri involvement with your world has been stained by coercion. We seek genuine dialogue." Her eyes flicked to Terrence. "And I believe Terrence Wynn can serve as a bridge." Terrence felt a flash of self-consciousness. He wasn't a polished diplomat, just an ex-analyst who got thrown into cosmic upheaval. But Dr. Kurum's appreciative nod hinted that his new role was indeed crucial. "The Council has reviewed all known data on the Charter's forcibly bound contracts," Kurum said. "We want to ensure such abuse never occurs again." In the days that followed, negotiations began in earnest. Dr. Kurum and her team set up a temporary station in the mansion's largest drawing room. Terrence found himself explaining the mansion's living architecture to wide-eyed scientists and legal experts. Zara spoke openly of the Taliri's culture, something her people had rarely shared with humans before. Topics ranged from dimensional anomalies to logistical concerns about registering caretaker status in international databases. Every conversation hammered home just how uncharted this territory was. At one point, a junior member of Karam's team asked Zara, "Why stay on Earth if you can manipulate dimensions? Couldn't you simply leave us behind?" It wasn't said with hostility, but curiosity and maybe concern. Zara's expression softened. Some Teleri might explore leaving, now that we're not tied to these nodes, but many of us have lived here so long that Earth is also home. We're not drifters in the void, seeking conquest or refuge. We want coexistence, and for that, we need trust. Trust was the watchword, and not just from humans. Other Teleri caretakers telepathically reached out to Zara through the newly stabilized network. Some were wary, uncertain if humans could ever truly accept them without domination. Others embraced the possibility of forging alliances. Terrence felt snatches of these exchanges in the back of his mind, a side effect of his bond with Zara. It was like overhearing distant, multi-layered conversation. While progress was hardly linear, a fragile optimism took root. As Dr. Karam's team prepared to leave the mansion, she took Terrence aside. "We're drafting a global framework to protect caretaker rights," she said. "We'll need testimony, yours, Zara's, and others. We'll ask a lot of questions, but the council genuinely wants a new era of transparency." She paused, her gaze drifting to the old staircase that had once confounded charter agents. This house was a prison for one side and a secret fortress for the other. Maybe it can become a place of dialogue now. Terrence exhaled, feeling both daunted and hopeful. "We'll try," he promised. "Just keep the lines open. Because if we've learned anything, it's that secrecy breeds paranoia, and paranoia leads to the worst outcomes." Months rolled by, bringing a mix of upheaval and renewal. The old mansion, officially recognized as the Wynn Nexus, became a focal point for researchers, dignitaries, and even curious civilians. Terrence moderated countless discussions, sometimes stepping away to gather his thoughts amid overgrown hedges or in the quiet sub-basement where the catalyst sphere pulsed with tranquil consistency. Whenever the world's demands overwhelmed him, he found solace in his bond with Zara, a mental link that offered mutual support. Little by little, Earth began adapting to the reality of Teleri coexistence. While not everyone welcomed the change, some extremist factions claimed humans were surrendering sovereignty. The general populace, exposed to reams of evidence about the Charter's dark practices, leaned toward cautious acceptance. Even so, Terrence recognized that transforming centuries of suspicion would require ongoing effort. One evening, standing on the balcony that overlooked the city lights, Terrence felt Zara's presence behind him. She joined him at the railing, the soft wind rustling her hair. "Our people are receiving invitations now," she remarked. "Science institutes, cultural expos, even humanitarian conferences. It's surreal seeing Teleri names on official programs where once we were a myth or a secret." Terrence nodded, recalling the day's news headlines about a Teleri caretaker addressing a global climate summit. "You deserve it. You've been tending to these nodes far longer than any government has existed." He shot her a gentle grin. "Besides, your illusions could liven up some dreary conferences." She laughed, a sound like chimes, then her expression turned contemplative. "I'm grateful, yet I wonder if it's sustainable. Peace founded on a single rewrite can be fragile. Are we certain no one else will try to exploit our energies again?" "Not certain," Terrence admitted, "but we've replaced a system of forced contracts with one of genuine consent. That alone removes the incentive for Teleri rebellions, and it undermines groups like the Charter. Right now, the biggest challenge is learning to share knowledge responsibly so no one can just weaponize it." Zara's gaze drifted to the horizon where faint silhouettes of other Victorian roofs dotted the historical district. "I sense new connections forming, not just between Teleri and humans, but among Teleri themselves, free to communicate without fear of punishment. We are rediscovering ourselves." A hush fell between them, filled only by the distant hum of city traffic. Then Zara turned toward Terrence. "And you, have you discovered yourself?" His breath caught. He realized how drastically his own life had changed. Gone was the solitary data analyst with a tidy schedule and cramped apartment. Now he was linked to an ancient cosmic lineage, bridging two species and living in a mansion that sometimes shifted rooms overnight. He felt a wave of gratitude for Zara's unwavering companionship, and more than that, a kind of tenderness that transcended normal romance. "I think so," he answered quietly, reaching for her hand. Their fingers interlaced, and he felt that familiar, comforting tingle of merged energies. "Maybe not entirely, but I'm on my way." They stood there, anchored against the starry sky, acknowledging that the future was full of uncertainty. But it was a shared uncertainty, underpinned by a trust that had taken root in cosmic soil. The Wynn-Teleri nexus, once a fortress and a prison, now beckoned others to walk its halls openly, forging a path away from exploitation and secrecy. And in that quiet moment, Terrence found acceptance. For the mansion, for Zara, and for a life that had become far stranger and far richer than any spreadsheet of probabilities could have ever predicted. From an outsider's point of view, inheriting an ancient house and colliding with alien forces felt overwhelming, yet I've grown to appreciate how much we can achieve by embracing the unknown. Watching Terrence step up to rewrite age-old contracts and seeing Zara finally gain the freedom her people deserved reminded me that unity can flourish where fear once ruled. Now that humans and Teleri collaborate as equals, the future seems more hopeful than ever. Of course, there's no shortage of new challenges, but it's the determination to meet them together that truly shines. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey. If you enjoyed the twists, revelations, and heartwarming triumphs, please comment below with your thoughts and theories. Let's discuss how these characters and cosmic possibilities inspired you. And don't forget to subscribe for more immersive stories that invite us all to ponder the wonders just beyond our familiar world.